over to yourself, Dev.
Thanks, Alan. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me a moment. We try the technology early, so it all should work. Right. Please, can everyone see that now?
Yes, all good, Dev.
Great, and I guess you can all hear me fine. If you're not, please let Alan know, and we'll try and remedy that. So good morning. Thank you all for joining, and I think we have some really good numbers of you attending. This session is on project governance, and like many of you who run projects or who are thinking of running projects, we all learn about project management, but project governance is sometimes a little bit of a dark art, and it's something that we do but don't really understand. And those who govern do govern but don't really know how they're doing it. So hopefully, as we go through this session, we'll unpick some of those and give you some good some tips on what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. Project governance is like ice cream, and I will try and explain that as we go through as well. And it's also just to add a little bit of color and flavor to the to the presentation. So let me start off with a little bit about us. And I've already mentioned that I've had a career spanning 24 years, and I've done a bit of everything. I've coded software, I've built websites, I've implemented change, national change to 50,000 people, and it's been an interesting journey for me. Project management is a bit of a way of life. I didn't set out to become a project manager. I just developed it as I went through and did the work that I was doing. But certainly for me, all of my successes have been down to people and understanding how people work and how to relate and engage with them. So that's me in a nutshell. Gary, I don't know whether you want to say a couple of words about yourself. You're on mute, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a couple of words. I'm Jerry Steinhauer. I've been around almost as long as you two have been combined. I hesitate to say that, but I've been around since the mid-70s. And I thoroughly endorse everything you just said there. You know, governance is a dark art, and there are pitfalls in there for the unwary. So I'm really pleased to be listening in on what you're saying.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Jerry. Gary, over to you.
I would agree. Governance is often looked at as a necessary evil. It is necessary, and it's only an evil if you fight it. If you make it as part of your daily deliverance, then it becomes really, really simple. So from experience, I can say that those who take the bull by the horns at the beginning of a piece of work find it a lot easier and actually a lot more beneficial than those who try to retrospectively shove it into a piece of work. So yeah, the word necessary evil is sometimes used, although I don't necessarily see it like that, but that's just because, as you said, Dev, it's about getting the right people and having it work properly through all the way up. Yeah.
Thank you. And just to remind all of you, these sessions are really tasters, and we are looking at touching on these topics. For more help, and for certainly if you're looking for mentoring, advice and guidance, the links at the bottom of this page will take you to either to Gary, myself, and indeed the other 30-odd mentors that we have on this group. So please take your time to look through and choose someone who can help you develop yourselves further. So let's carry on. So how is governance like ice cream? Well, for me, it's because it comes in so many different flavors. It is about how it is used and consumed, just like where you have different flavor of ice cream. The ingredients are really basically the same. For ice cream, you have three main ingredients: cream, sugar, and flavoring. And for me, for project governance, you have people, structure, and information. I think what you'll note from that is that structure and information is also what project management is all about. So there is a lot of overlap between the two. But project governance is definitely not project management. It is about providing an oversight function, and it is about that ability to provide assurance and a bit of control over projects, and creating an environment to ensure that the right projects get done, that they get done well. Good governance has three main constituents: people, structure, and information. The people are the people who are involved in the project. Structure is the processes, the functions, the management frameworks that are required to deliver the project. And information are all the documents, reports, communications, and articles that are necessary to inform decision makers and stakeholders. Across those three main pillars, effectively, you have 5 overlapping areas of responsibility. The first is, of course, leadership and strategic guidance. This is where those governing set the vision, ensure that there is alignment with the organization. They have access to the necessary resources, and they can also engage with the wider stakeholders. From the guidance and support perspective, it is about providing that non-project management expertise and experience, setting the context, looking at policies and procedures, and also deciding which of the frameworks are actually applicable to the project, because not necessarily everything is within an organization. From a boundaries and accountability perspective, it is about setting spending limits, setting expectations, ensuring and monitoring key stages of the project, and ensuring that the project manager and the project team are empowered to do what they need to do. And then you've got your control and decision making, which is all about looking at reports, understanding the direction of travel, making decisions at specific control points, e.g. between stage boundaries, and knowing that what's happening is actually right for the project and right for the organization indeed, rather than just the project. And then it is also finally about assurance and challenge. And this is about providing that critical sounding board, and that the project manager, assuring the project manager that things are on track, and maintaining a hand on the tiller, so that while the project manager is responsible for delivering the project, the governing body and governing organization is there to ensure that the project is going in the right direction. And all of those things together provide confidence that the project is being done well. So let's focus on those three pillars. You've got looking at people, and there we've already touched on what leadership is about, strategic direction, having an empowered sponsor, and that's actually a really important element of this. Having a sponsor who backs the project wholeheartedly. Ideally, it's someone who has skin in the game, and for whom the project has meaning, and what is being delivered is what they're responsible for. And if you start a project, or if you get on a project where this isn't the case, then I think your starting point there should be to try and find someone who can sponsor the project who does have that. And if you don't, then it is your job as a project manager to point out that that is a significant risk. And one of the first things that I tend to do when looking at a project is consider whether I can actually stop the project. Because if I can stop the project and give enough of an argument that there isn't a case to have the project, then that's effectively eroding the business case. And if you're eroding the business case, then the project didn't have a leg to stand on, and why are we spending money on it? I'm not going to go through the three items on the left in a great level of detail, because we've already done a presentation on this before, and there is a lot of information available. But certainly looking at the do's and don'ts, and we're going to look at those in context. As a project manager, you need to be taking ownership of the governance process. That does not mean that you become the decision maker, but you certainly manage the process of governance. You are there to set up the terms of reference, there to ensure that you've got the right stakeholders on board. You and the sponsor are there to ensure you have the right stakeholders on board. And that the right levels of responsibility are given to whoever's on the project board, or indeed within the team. And that's where you as a project manager will create a RACI matrix. Certainly, when you have stakeholders across an organization, not everyone is going to back the project, and not everyone will understand or know and agree that what you're doing in the project is right, and that's fine. That's what you want. Sometimes you do need those naysayers so that you can actually continue to validate and assure that what you're doing is right. Because if you can do that, then that helps you in delivering the project. And that's where that respecting others' views comes into it. There's an element of emotional intelligence. For me, the number one thing of being a project manager is actually understanding and working with people. The technology, to be fair, is reasonably straightforward. It is technology, it works or it doesn't work. But with people, you have different variations. You'll have some people who are for the project sometimes, at other times they are not. Some of them don't understand it, which is why they're resistant, or some of them do understand it and they back you wholeheartedly and are there to support you. So it is about you being able to use your judgment and understanding of people to help get the right kind of backing for your project. And that covers, I think, pretty much all of the do's. Apart from that last one, which is holding stakeholders to account. That's an element of your RACI matrix. You've identified who the people are on the project who are going to be working on the project and what levels of governance that they're providing and what levels of responsibility they have. How do you then hold them to account? Well, firstly, it is making sure you have a sponsor's backing. And then secondly, it is also about having some clear terms of reference and making sure that whoever's governing the project understands what their responsibilities are and what they need to be doing. Having said, you need someone who's an empowered sponsor and who understands and backs the project wholeheartedly. You shouldn't necessarily expect the same level of commitment from them as you do, because they are working on other projects and programs, and they're quite often working at a higher level and looking at organizationally what needs to be happening. So that their time commitments on the project are not going to be the same as yours. You need to manage that, and whenever you are requiring their input, you need to be clear what it is you want from them. You need to get their support. Very often, if you do present information or if you do present decisions, you do require decisions from them, then it is your options that you provide and your responses and say, well, we have a problem here, and here's what I suggest that we do. That actually helps the sponsor make those decisions. You shouldn't have steering groups, and I'll give you an example of this. You shouldn't have steering groups that include everybody important. There is a tendency in some organizations where all directors become members of a board. Well, okay, but are they really relevant? And do they add value? I once started a project, or took over a project rather, where there were 14 people on the project board. A majority of them were there because they expected to be. They were leaders, they were senior leaders, and they expected to be included on a project board. But did they really know what the project was about? No. Could they actually help and support the project? Not really. And in fact, because we had 14 people on the board, the project meetings were, very, very long, meandered from one thing to the other, and usually we spent a lot of time talking about things that were not relevant to the project because everyone used that as a session to voice their concerns and issues about what was happening elsewhere in the organization. So, and it was a hard and difficult thing for me to do at the time, but with the help of the sponsor, he actually got rid of everyone on the board and re-invited those half a dozen or so people that we felt were actually quite relevant to the board. It did cause, and it can cause a little bit of have an impact on how you are perceived in an organization, but you need to then measure that against how much you're actually going to deliver and what it is you're going to deliver. And I think one of the things I've taken away of being a project manager is that, as Gary said, sometimes you are a necessary evil, and yes, you are. You're there to deliver something that needs to be delivered. You're not there necessarily to make friends all the time. It does help, but you if you're there to deliver something. I think that's it from this slide. Right. Structure. So structure is also about having that strategic context and understanding why we're doing what we're doing, how are we going to do it, what are the relevant policies and frameworks that need to be applied, and having a plan. It might sound a bit surprising, but when you have a project, you think you'd automatically have a plan, but that's not necessarily the case when you start a project. When you're initiating a project and you've got your PID and you're putting your business case together, that is where you need to start having a plan. And it is more than just a schedule of events. It is about how are you going to do this? Who's going to do it? When is it? When are the various elements going to happen? You need to monitor, measure, and control your project. That's what the plan is all about. And how are you then going to assure that all of this is happening? What levels of approval do you have to go through? How do you confirm that things are being done well? So all of those things are structure, and where at a governance level, those who are going to need to be making sure is happening. So from a do perspective, do ensure that the board, in terms of reference, covers what and how the decisions will be made. So when you're putting that together, that is one of the first things that a project board needs to do, is to agree a terms of reference. And amongst that is who's going to have the ultimate say, to the sponsor, but then someone might have a say over what happens with the supplier, typically the senior supplier, and you have a senior user. So all of them have specific responsibilities. In that kind of instance, how do they actually do that? Make sure you find how your plan will be monitored and controlled. So you are presenting a Gantt chart that has a plan over the next 6-12 months. It's got deliverables and milestones in there. Are they the right milestones? And when you reach that milestone, how do you actually prove that you've reached that milestone? And also do sort of sequence and guidance from the project board. You are a project manager. It is your ultimate responsibility to deliver the project, but you're not know-all and you can't see all. So sometimes it is good to have that capability to go to your sponsor or indeed the board and say, I have an issue here that I think this is what I need to be doing. Is that the right thing I should be doing? And getting their feedback and their views is very, very important in ensuring you do well. There is then the issue as to how and what is good governance. And for me, I think it is about tailoring according to the environment. I've had projects where I've had 2 or 3 people on a project board, and that's enough because it's a reasonably small, short, sharp project. You don't need more people on there, and they're able to give you that oversight and assurance that you need. Similarly, I've had projects, as I said, where we started off with 14, we ended up with half a dozen. And then you bring on other people as and when you need a specialist advice and guidance. So although the decision makers will stay the same, but you then tailor that according to the various technical. For example, if you need a technical decision that needs to be made and the people on the board don't have that level of understanding, then you do need to bring in tech specialists in to advise them and give them that information. So tailor your governance according to the environment. Common sense is a key tool for project managers, and it is about having that simple understanding of what needs to be done. I'm a Prince 2 practitioner. I'm an Agile practitioner. I've got MSP, so I've got all of the relevant, to my mind, all of the relevant certifications. But how do I use those? It is about how you build your project up, what is relevant for that organization. Some organizations are suited for an agile environment, some aren't. Recognize that. Don't force something down an organization that doesn't work. Also, it is about making sure that if you are looking to, for example, implement agile for a project, then that needs to include your governance. your governance needs to be agile as well. Otherwise, your project is never going to be agile. Don't forget to update your plan regularly. Okay, yeah, seems like a sensible enough point, but it is interesting how often that doesn't happen, because you get so drawn up in running the project and dealing with issues and dealing with things that need to be resolved. The project plan doesn't get updated until you have to present it to the board, and then you rush through and try and squeeze through an update that sort of makes sense, but you're not 100% sure. So it is about taking that time out to actually, at least once a week, spend a bit of time on your project plan to ensure that it is on target and that you have captured all the elements that are happening well. Don't go overboard with assurance processes. This is, for me, particularly a bugbear. I wholeheartedly believe in PMOs and having a robust assurance processes. But again, this is where common sense and pragmatism needs to come in. If you're running an agile project where you need to get quick deliveries and it's moving at a very fast pace, you can't then suddenly have an assurance process that adds 3 to 4 days to reviewing documents that are produced or artifacts that are produced, and then providing you with approvals that half a dozen other people have to review and sign off on. That just does not work. So you need to implement an assurance process that actually works for your project. But at the same time, it shouldn't be one where you're actually increasing the risk to what you're delivering. So there is a balance to be had under these kind of circumstances. And then finally, we have information. Communicate, communicate, communicate. That is the basic element of any project really, whether it's through agile or waterfall, Prince2, whatever. Being able to communicate with your stakeholders is one of the most important things. And it's not just about telling them or informing them what's going on. It is about seeing what's happening out there. It is about listening to your stakeholders, listening to your team, and building those kind of reports that actually make sense. Being open and transparent about what's happening. There have been a number of occasions when I've come across projects where risks are actually hidden or issues are hidden from the board because they don't want the board to think that the project's not going well. That's one of the most fatal errors you can make, because that just means that the board doesn't understand what's going on, and the decisions they make will impact and actually hinder the project further rather than helping you get it sorted out. So be open and transparent, and also have simple, straightforward frameworks and processes that you're working on. Keep it simple. It is about being pragmatic, realistic, and not overcomplicating the elements of the project. So if you've got team members who are responsible for delivering things and are responsible for producing reports, make those reports simple and straightforward. Unless it's, I don't see a reason why you need to have more than half a dozen lines or coming back to you every week about what's going on. Because in that case, for me, that means that you are not actually being proactive and going out there and working with your team to understand what they're working on. Reports and frameworks, all of these procedures need to be very, very simple and straightforward. Again, down the left column, look, do's and don'ts. Remember to regularly communicate as often and in as many ways as necessary. Because not all stakeholders understand everything you're saying, so you need to make sure that you are tailoring your communications to them. Consider the audience. I think that's quite clear. So if you're talking to technical people, then make sure that your reports reflect that. If you're talking to frontline staff, what are their concerns and issues? What do they need to hear about that's more relevant to them? And also, at the same time, it is about managing all of this work in relation to the rest of the project. So how much effort do you need to put in your communications? And how much information are you actually going to provide? Don't forget, communication is a two-way process. Definitely, it's about listening and hearing what people are saying, as well as informing them and letting them know what's going on. And the other two don'ts I've also already covered. I think I'm nearing the end of this presentation, and then I'll get to your questions. So, what tools do we use for governance? Surprise, surprise, they're pretty much the same as what you use for project management. We look at stakeholder mapping to understand who our stakeholders are, what influence they have, and understand what drives them, what influence will they have on the project. Understanding roles and responsibilities across the board and in the team is what you will use a RACI to help you understand. And we have various additional slides that I can take you through on stakeholder mapping, RACI, and reports and dashboards that give you a little bit more detail about what's good practice for that. RAID logs and or registers, they're a very important governance tool, because without that understanding as to what is going to have an impact on the project, decisions are not going to be clear, and decisions won't be the best ones made. Budget and resource plans, monitoring what you originally set out to do and what the actual expenditure is. There's an element of earned value management here as well. You know, how much are you actually delivering based on what you're spending? There's an element of scheduling, which is your Gantt chart, knowing what should be done and when it should be done, and what are the influences, what impacts one has on the other. All of those are quite important as well. And then finally, common sense and pragmatism. That is a key tool. It's not a software tool or a technical tool, but it is, to my mind, one of the key tools of governance. So here are some examples. I've touched on a couple of these before, of good and bad practice for governance. I'm happy to go through some of these in a bit more detail. Should I need to through your questions, but certainly I think they're all reasonably straightforward. 4 levels of governance and assurance, for example, is something that I've come across in public service, where you've not only got your immediate board, you've also then got the departmental board, and then sometimes you've got treasury involved or cabinet office involved as well. And they all are different levels of assurance, and they all require similar but different updates from you, and that can be quite time consuming. On the good practice side, you certainly need stakeholders who have skin in the game, because they are the ones who will be actively supporting you and will be looking for ways to make the project a success. I think I will stop there.
Just wanted to add, sorry, can you go back to the previous slide for a second?
Yeah, sure.
So there was a question that came up in the chat box, which was a really, really relevant one, which is, what are some of the mistakes that people make when trying to implement governance? And on the bad practice side, what you'll notice at the bottom, there's something there called superstitious behavior. And that is where we as individuals, we believe that more is better. So one of the things that sometimes happen is people go over the top. And I'll give you an example. So I've recently just run a program, and one of my project managers, every single week without fail, he would do a 14-slide deck. Nobody read it, because 14 slides takes too long to go through. So it's about us thinking, okay, who's my audience? What do they need? How can I provide it? So creating massive decks for Steerco or Exco or even project boards is not the way to go. It's about understanding what's important and what's valuable. So that's what's called superstitious behavior. It's a phrase which is used within the industry quite a lot, but it is where we go over the top. We don't know what people want, so we assume they're going to want what we want to give them, which is chapter and verse. But if you are on the other side of this and you're sitting in one of your meetings, maybe a monthly Steerco, and it's an hour or 2 hours, and someone's going to go and walk through a 25-slide deck, you're going to lose them. So again, it's about tailoring. So I just wanted to pull the two pieces together, because the question was asked, and there was a reference to something that was an example of where people do things that are not quite right.
No, that's fair enough, Gary.
Thanks, Nev.
Okay. Some final thoughts. So this is about having a clear separation between a steering group and working group, because often you have some of the same senior stakeholders who are actually helping manage and run your project, as well as providing some of the governance elements as well. And while that's all well and good, it is important to ensure that those who are actually governing the project are and their roles in governing the project are very distinct to actually help you deliver the project. There is going to be some sort of overlap on a lot of a lot of instances, but it is how you manage and control that. That's very important. Certainly, it is about communication as often and as much as you can with your stakeholders. It is about holding people to account, whether it's your team and work stream leads, but it's also about holding your sponsor and your board to account. Are they actually helping you deliver the project? You have that capability as a project manager to be able to challenge them as well. In as much as they were there to challenge you in how you're doing the project, you can also challenge them in how they're governing the project. And that's where your role in running that governance and in managing that process of governance is important. Do critically challenge the plan and the progress to date. That's a job definitely for you as a project manager, but it's also a job for the board and those who are governing the project too. They shouldn't just accept just because they haven't paid. They don't have day-to-day sight of what's going on a project. They shouldn't just automatically accept what's being sent to them and the information that's been given to them. And quite often you will see that. So you need to put in those kind of processes to allow them to do that. Having an honest voice. I think, Gary, that's one of the ones that you added in. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
When I can find, let me find the mute button quickly, really quickly. Honest voice. So when you get these people in the room and you're presenting something, they want the truth. Okay, so if it's not going well or something's just about to go wrong, you need to tell them, because the other reason that we do governance is it's our way as PMs saying, look, I need help. This is about to go wrong. Who can help me bring it back on track? Or this has gone wrong. I need someone within the steering group to support me. So if you don't tell the truth and then something blows up later on, you've lost your golden opportunity to reach out in a very safe environment, say, I need help. Fundamentally, nobody likes bad news, but nobody likes bad news when it's about to happen. So I have a phrase, which is, something's going to go wrong, you tell me as soon as you know. Fundamentally, and stakeholders and senior sponsors are exactly the same. So it's about being honest. Absolutely, there's no such thing as bad news if it's delivered correctly in the right fashion.
Yeah. Okay. And on the don't side, don't be inconsistent. If you've set out to do something and you're setting out the way you're going to work, be consistent. That doesn't mean you can't be flexible, can't adjust things, but don't start off with, as Gary was saying, 14 slides and then go down to one slide where I give an explanation as to why you've done that. It is about understanding and presenting information in the same way, so that when a board member who hasn't something for a month gets the papers and documents, they can automatically see how everything fits together. It's not a new way of doing things each and every time. And also about when you seek decisions, it is about offering options and recommendations, because there's no point in asking a question where you don't already have a good idea as to what the answer should be. It's not good for you, not good for the project, and certainly not good for those who are governing the project. Thank you. That's me done.
Thank you. Thanks, Dev. That was great. I hope you'll benefit from that. And there are many questions that have come in, perhaps too many. So we were successful in encouraging you all to ask questions. So we have about 13 or so questions and about 20 minutes of the session to go. So we'll do some quick fire answers and then see if you've got any subsequent questions on those as well, or anything else that you want to raise verbally. Okay, and I'll try and group some of the questions, but let me go through it methodically one by one. So the first question was, with new ways of working or with the agile way of delivery, how relevant is this project governance? for me is more relevant for traditional way of handling projects like waterfall or early days of software development. So, and this question's been asked by a couple of people in different ways, but essentially, okay, so we're now doing Agile, or everyone's talking about Agile. How do we do governance, and is it relevant in an Agile delivery? Dev, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So Agile governance do go hand in hand. I mean, yes, there are elements that you may find are not relevant. But what I've found is that organizations who try and run Agile projects while they don't have an Agile governance structure will, I wouldn't say fail, but will have difficulty in governing a project well. The key elements of governance being as agile as a project is about having that ability to assign responsibility, trusting the people who are doing the work, delegating responsibility. There's more collaboration that comes across in an agile governance process, and they also those governing also have to be tolerant of failure, because sometimes when you're running things in an agile way, you are actually trying things out. If they don't work, then you try something else out. So they need to get their heads around that it's not always about being successful. It is about also learning from the mistakes that are made.
Okay, thanks, Dev. And Gary, I'm going to bring you in, but what I want to do is just mention that, so there were about 3 or 4 questions on this topic of Agile, waterfall, governance, etc. And also some other questions around, once you're doing one governance model, do you need to stick with it? So if you could just kind of summarize what your thoughts around that are before we move on to a different area of question.
Just really quickly to go back to what Dev said. So the question was, do we need governance when we do an agile delivery? My question is, why would you not? You still have stakeholders who still want to be confident and reassured that what you're doing is delivering what it's meant to be delivering. The difference is, instead of you waiting at the end to see something, you get lots of small deliverables in between. So absolutely, you should always do governance. It's tailored, fundamentally tailored. With regards to how do you mix them, so typically, Agile is often seen as a delivery mechanism because you're doing lots of iterations, you're delivering quick early value to the organization, such as MVPs, etc. You can still do the traditional governance where you have your stage gates and then you use the Agile for the delivery cycle. So it can be done. The only thing to consider is if you are trying to, let's say, do a software development piece of work, in the actual build piece, try and stick to one, because you're going to have massive amounts of confusion if you try to do two different approaches, and it's going to make your life a lot more difficult. So typically the way in which I've done it at high level, I'll have the typical governance, I'll have my stage gates, my entry points, the criteria. Then when I get to build, I'll use Agile. Because I'm using Scrum, I'll use Agile. So I'll have all the governance pieces in there, which is great for that phase. But I've still got to do steer count. I've still got to tell them what's going on with the money, with the resources, with the plan. So you can do it, but fundamentally, I won't try and do mixed governance models when I'm doing one phase. That is going to make an absolute nightmare of your piece of work. But to go back to the very beginning, of course you need governance. Why would you not? You've still got stakeholders. You've still got people who want to know what's happening. You still want to give confidence back to the teams and back to the organization that you're in control and you know how to manage it.
Okay, thank you. So let me take the discussion in a different direction, moving away from the structure of governance. So we'll come back to it though. Most of the questions were around that. But let me go somewhere else now. So one question was, would you see some stakeholders in more than one category in the RACI matrix? So Dev, perhaps if you could pick this one up when you were showing the RACI matrix.
Sure. Yeah. And the answer is, I would rather that you try and make sure that you have in a RACI matrix, I think you would have people who are either going to be responsible or accountable. Very rarely would you see people who are both. So yes, and in short, the answer is yes. You would see people across those things, but try and limit those. There's a slide here that I've brought up, which gives you an example and some tips about RACI. It is not just about creating the RACI, but it's also about analyzing that RACI as you go along. So I'm sure when we share the slides, you'll be able to see how you can actually decipher a rate and see how well you are actually managing the people on your team.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go on to another matrix question, but there, just one thing I'd add on to what you said there, Dev, is that of course for the accountable part of the RACI, you would generally look to only have one person or one organizational team, etc. It's the responsibilities that you can obviously share out. But let me go on to the next one, which is around the risk matrix. So a question was asked, I would like to touch and understand more on risk matrix and management. Where would you see this included in governance? So how do you bring risk management into governance? And perhaps Gary, if you could pick that up. Yeah.
So fundamentally, so Dev, do you want to go onto the slide that's got the dashboard just for a second?
Yeah.
So typically governance covers things such as finances, schedules, and risk is included fundamentally. So risk is an inherent part of any piece of governance. So if you want to set up a governance approach, an absolute minimum, you would need your risks and perhaps your finance and where you're on your schedule. So it's an inherent part of any governance. If you haven't got risk management in there, you don't have a governance framework. Because what you're saying to the organization is, I've got my eyes closed, I don't know what's going on, I think there's something's happening outside and I'm not doing anything about them. So fundamentally, it has to be part of the governance framework. Dave, I don't know if you've got anything that you want to perhaps add?
No, it just goes back to some of those do's and don'ts that we went through. It is about not hiding what's going wrong with the project, because if you are hiding that, then A, you're not being transparent and honest, and then secondly, the information that the board or the governors have about what's going on is going to be flawed. So yeah, absolutely, you do need to have risk involved in any element of governance and management indeed.
Okay. Thank you. So the next question I'd like to raise is, how would organizations respond to project governance for the unforeseen circumstances like COVID? So this could obviously be any unforeseen, but how should an organization adapt its governance or have the right governance model in place in the first place to be able to adapt? And that obviously includes waterfall, agile, whatever it is. Sure. So who wants to pick that one?
Yeah, I mean, just a quick one on that. I think it's impossible to predict everything. Certainly, when you're looking at your risks and issues, you should be capturing elements that are most likely to go wrong with the project. You can't. Well, I think very few organizations would have predicted something like COVID-19. But what you can predict is, what if we can't access information? What if we can't exchange information with other people, and what if people aren't available? Those are some of the standard risks and issues that you should be capturing in some of the larger projects as well. So those kind of things will be covered under something like COVID-19 or against rail strikes or any of those kind of things that could actually, external factors that can affect the project. So yeah, it is about having an understanding of what is likely to go wrong, what could go wrong, statistically as well as specifically to the project.
Just one tiny little thing to add in conjunction to what Dev's just said. I would only consider looking or trying to understand or manage those that you can control. So in the example of COVID-19, you can't do anything about it, but what Dev has said was, okay, what does that mean for us if we can't get access? You can control access, you can't control a pandemic, you can't control a meteor coming over. So it's only focus on those things that your organization can control and have influence over.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let me move us on. So in the chat function, I'm about to post about 5 questions so everyone can see it that came up I've grouped them all together, but we'll try and answer them as one, okay? But I'm posting them in the chat so that everyone's aware of them. So you'll see 5 questions. But Dev, if I could just paraphrase, it's essentially about right governance model, standardizing your governance, how do you get it right, roll it out across the organization, et cetera, et cetera. So can you just give us a general view from your experience as to, and you've covered them in your slides, as to how you set up and establish good governance that can relate to whether it's waterfall or agile, and essentially provide the assurance that you were referring to.
Sure. So the starting point for me would be to understand what happens in the organization anyway. So you you already have part of an organization. It has a corporate structure. It has a governance structure. How does that work? If it is something that's, and then use that as your template for saying, well, right, we now need to deliver some projects. How do we make sure that those who are actually governing those projects are able to do so without having too much change or too much new things to worry about? So typically, for example, when you're working with an organization that has got a Prince 2 mentality or a waterfall management style, and you're looking to implement agile, it is very difficult to, from my experience, to implement an agile project if you don't have agile governance. So you need to change it from top down, because the people who are actually making those decisions need to understand that these decisions have to be made quickly. We can't wait until 6 weeks for the next board meeting. Some of these decisions need to be made on a bi-weekly or weekly basis. So either they delegate that level of governance down the project, or they're willing to actually participate in those regular meetings as and when they're required. So for me, it is about starting with what's already there, adapting that to work for your project, and then if you do then want to make that change across the organization, it's take a step-by-step process. And the key to that is having the right sponsors for that, because that in itself becomes a project in its own right.
Okay, so now what I want to do, look, there's a few more questions, but we've covered many of them. I want to just open it up more for a verbal discussion to see if anyone wants to raise, another point verbally, or based on what's been discussed already, if there's a subsequent point that you have that you would just like to discuss. So, please remember to unmute yourself, but please feel free to ask a question now.
Hi, Debbie here. So I worked in a governance role for a number of years in an IT organisation. So my role was making sure that every service was covered from a service management point of view before it went into live. And I think one of the questions up there was about what's one of the mistakes, is not engaging early enough for me. So when I first started in the role, it was seen, project managers who didn't understand service would see it something as bolted on at the end, when actually it should be there right at the beginning. So your plans included, your questions, your guidance is there. And once people realise that, then they start engaging you later on. So to me, that's a big thing. You need to be there up front. You need to know what the deliverables are. And you can help the project manager then. So my role was helping him to deliver presentations, helping him to make sure he had all his evidence and proof together and stuff like that. So that was just a comment there that I thought was important.
Debbie, quick question. Yeah. Is your organisation an IT organisation now?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason I asked that is because what you've raised is a fantastic example of how consideration is given very late. And ITIL as a framework has as we all know, has a very defined set of structures and disciplines and set of roles. And you're absolutely spot on. The people who are going to accept something as part of a governance function can support and help. They're not actually detractors. They want the best, but sometimes we're so busy running that we forget to look over and think, oh, hang on, in 6 weeks' time, I'm going to cut over into service. Where's my transition manager or my service design manager? So things like ITIL are absolutely fantastic for that.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for that, Debbie. So anyone else want to ask a point on something that's already been discussed? Okay, if you do have, just remember to unmute yourself. Let me just address then a question that's coming to me privately, just to raise it with everyone. So someone's asked, does everyone have to see the RACI matrix? So Dev, if you could pick that up. So you've designed a RACI matrix, etc. How widely do you publish it? Does everyone need to be aware of it? What's your view on that?
Again, this is about transparency. Why not? Why shouldn't everyone see it? What are you trying to hide? So the answer is yes, everyone should be able to see it if they want to. It is about having all of your documents available and all of your articles available. So it is an important element that of project governance and management.
And I'll just add one bit, so generally I try and stay quiet, but one bit that I know has worked for me is the bit that is on the accountable and responsible. Not only would I advise, they need to see it, but they really need to understand it. So those people that you're making accountable and responsible, or teams or departments, you know, however you split your RACI, whether it's a supplier, they really, really need to understand it, don't they? And that's where often it also fails.
Yeah.
In addition,
can I just add? Sorry, carry on, Gary.
So I was going to say, in addition, it adds the concept of peer accountability, because if everybody understands who's accountable and therefore and who's responsible, then it's not just the PM doing it, but as a group and as a team, it's a collective responsibility and accountability, which is one of the best ways of doing it, rather than just one person cracking the whip.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I find that where people are averse to share information, or where there is this element of, I'm not sure whether I need to be doing this, it is about the confidence you have in the project and the confidence in yourself. So if you're hesitant to share information, hesitant to share risks, hesitant to share your RACI, ask yourself why. Why are you in that position, and why are you doing that? If because you're not sure of what it is you're delivering, then go back to first principles. Look at your business case. Query that with the sponsor. Talk to your board, because that has an element of percolation throughout the project then. So I think it is not uncommon for people to be concerned about what information they're sharing, and a lot of that is because they're not sure what it is that they're doing. So you need to stop that right away.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've answered all of the questions. I know we haven't gone into each one in detail, but I think overall they've all been answered. If you feel that you've asked a question that hasn't been answered, or you have a subsequent, you know, question point that you'd like to make, then what I'll do now is unmute everyone. So please raise that now, and we'll address it in the few minutes we've got left. If we find that actually there are no other questions, you're all satisfied, then what I'm going to ask is to see what you would like to have for a future session in terms of any other detail, things that have interested you from this. So let's just do the questions first, and then I'll come on to future sessions in a second, okay? So I'm unmuting everyone. Hopefully there won't be too much noise. Any point that anyone wants to raise, or a question that hasn't been answered, or a subsequent point?
Hi.
Hi, Azhar.
Thank you so much. First things first, for arranging this session. So informative and very interactive. My question is, if I'm not wrong, there is also a Slack channel which is created by you to empower professionals like us with information on related project related issues and other related topics. So how does that is different from this, and are we going to have these both these things simultaneously going forward by your organization?
Okay, so if I've understood the question, then Azhar, thank you for it. So the Slack channel is there and will be there. And so if for those of you that are not a member of the Slack channel where the mentors and the mentorees are interacting, please join. I can email everyone the link afterwards. But in terms of these sessions that we're running, we're doing them in parallel. So we'll have these sessions that we'll do, which is essentially one or two too many. And we'll also have the one-to-one sessions and the discussions that we're having in the Slack channel. So I think that was your question. I hope I've answered it. So yeah, both will continue. So the stuff that we're doing in these presentations and the Slack channel, and I'll share the link with everyone afterwards.
Okay, so one quick thing. So if we could have some kind of a group of people on LinkedIn. So I think what we can do is we can easily communicate and also probably raise questions, post questions, and get answers from you people.
Mm-hmm.
So currently, I don't think it's there on board.
So there's a LinkedIn page that we've created as well. I think that's the one you're referring to, right? So there's a LinkedIn page for those people that don't use Slack, and there's obviously the Slack channel. We are discussing between the mentors and I as to how do we manage both. But absolutely, if your question is, can I raise stuff on the LinkedIn page, you know, add a post there? Yes, for sure, and you'll get answers. And can I raise stuff in Slack and get my answer there? Absolutely. But as I said, we will form a view as to how we manage both different mediums. But for now, from your perspective, yes, you can post and interact with either area, either Slack or on LinkedIn, and we'll also have the sessions that we're having.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah? Okay, thank you, Azar. Any other questions from anyone? Yes? Is that Faye? Faye, if that's you're breaking up, so we're not hearing you fully. So look, unfortunately, we have run out of time anyway. Look, so if anyone else had a question to raise, point they wanted to discuss, please message me.
It's not small.
Hi, do you have a question? Okay, we might just have a chat in the background. But look, so we're going to have to finish this session. Let me just mute everyone 1 second.
Alim, I had something to say.
Okay, go on. Yes, we're hearing you now. Yes.
You were talking about something about the next session or future sessions. With this session, though I enjoyed it, I enjoyed the aspect of examples, especially from Debbie and Gary. So in future sessions, if we could get more examples,
okay,
of some of the points that were raised, that will be really helpful. Because some of us learn from experiences from ourselves and from others. So that's what I want to raise.
Perfect. Yep, absolutely. Thank you for making that point. So like I said, we'll come back to you with some specifics, but also for all of you, feel free to reach out to any of the mentors who are giving their time for free. You can book 30-minute slots with them or longer, depending on the mentor. So you can have that one-to-one session with any of the mentors, as I said, for free, where you can also learn from their experiences. And there's about 30 mentors and some 300 or so people in total in the Slack channel. But as I said, I will share these links with everyone afterwards. So we are over time by a couple of minutes. So I'm conscious that some of you will need to leave anyway. We'll stop the recording. Just